The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Red Butte Station, turning the wooden platform into a furnace. Caleb Boone pulled his hat lower, squinting against the glare that bounced off the silver rails stretching endlessly into the shimmering desert. The wind carried red dust in lazy spirals, coating everything his boots, his duster. The letter folded carefully in his vest pocket. He'd read that letter a dozen times since receiving it 2 weeks ago. Miss Martha O'Rourke. The matrimonial agency had written, plain-spoken, hard-working, experienced with household management. Exactly what he'd requested. Someone who wouldn't disturb the careful order he'd built around his life since Sarah died. The whistle shrieked across the desert, and the Southern Pacific locomotive emerged from the heat waves like a black iron beast. Caleb straightened, unconsciously brushing dust from his clothes. Around him, other folks gathered, merchants waiting for goods, a cavalry detachment heading to Fort Stanton, and old Mrs. Hartley come to collect her nephew from back east. The train wheezed to a stop, steam hissing and metal groaning. Passengers began disembarking, a drummer in a checkered suit, 2 nuns clutching their habits against the wind, a family with 3 young ones looking bewildered by the vastness of the territory. Then he saw her. She stepped down from the car with the grace of a mountain cat, one hand gripping a worn carpet bag, the other clutching Lord help him a violin case. No bonnet covered her hair, which was the color of prairie wheat struck by lightning. Her dress, though travel-stained, showed quality in its cut, and she wore it with an unconscious elegance that made every other woman on the platform look overdressed. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, green as sage honey. They swept the platform with an alertness that belonged on a hunter, not a mail-order bride. This couldn't be Martha O'Rourke. She spotted him wasn't hard, being the only man standing alone with the particular stance of someone waiting for a stranger, and approached with long, confident strides, no Eastern mincing, no false modesty. "Mr. Boone." Her voice had smoke in it, the kind that came from speaking over wind and distance. "Ma'am." He touched his hat brim, trying to reconcile this wild beauty with the plain homemaker he'd expected. "You're Miss O'Rourke." Something flickered in those green eyes. "Lila O'Rourke. The agency sent word." "Not Martha, Lila. The agency must have made a mistake, or—" "You best collect your trunks," he said, pushing down the unease crawling up his spine. "Got a wagon waiting." "This is all." She lifted the carpet bag slightly. "Travel light, always have." A woman crossing the frontier with one bag and a violin. Nothing about this felt right. They walked to his wagon in silence, her boot heels clicking on the boardwalk with a rhythm that made him think of telegraph keys. He helped her up. She didn't need it, but accepted the courtesy and noticed how her fingers gripped the violin case like it held salvation itself. "Hot," she said as he clicked the team into motion. "Gets hotter." "Good. I like heat." Strange thing to say. Most Eastern women wilted in the territorial sun, but then nothing about this woman aligned with Eastern. They passed the main street Murphy's General Store, the Copper Dollar Saloon, First Baptist Church looking pristine and judgmental in white paint. Through the window of the Western Union office, he caught her staring at the telegraph operator, her expression unreadable. "You know Morse code." The question popped out before he could stop it. Her fingers tightened on the violin case. My cousin worked for Western Union. Picked up a bit." Another lie. He could smell them now, like smoke on the wind before a wildfire. But what kind of woman lied her way into a marriage with a small rancher in the middle of nowhere? "The ceremony," he said, turning the wagon toward Murphy's. "Judge travels circuit. Won't be back for 3 months. But Murphy's a notary. Legal enough for the territory." Now, for the first time, she showed uncertainty. "Unless you got somewhere else to be." She laughed a short, bitter sound. "No, Mr. Boone, nowhere else at all." The ceremony took 10 minutes. Murphy's wife and the telegraph operator stood witness. Lila signed her name with a steady hand, though Caleb noticed she hesitated a heartbeat before writing O'Rourke. When Murphy pronounced them wed, she looked at Caleb with those green eyes and said, "I'll try to be what you need." Not what he'd expected her to say, not love, honor, and obey, or any of the usual pleasantries. Just that simple promise, heavy with meaning he couldn't decode. They climbed back in the wagon as the sun angled toward the red buttes that gave the town its name. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Rules," Caleb said finally. "I run a working ranch, need things orderly." "I understand order. No music in the house. No. Disruptions. I wake at 4. Work till dark. You'll manage the house, garden, chickens, help with calving season." "And if I need to defend myself?" The question jarred him. "From what?" "Rattlesnakes, coyotes." She paused. "Men with bad intentions?" "I'll teach you to shoot."
"I know how."
Of course she did. He was beginning to think this woman knew a lot of things she shouldn't. They turned off the main road onto his property, following the creek that still ran despite the dry spring. The house sat in a natural bowl, protected by ridges on 3 sides, with a view clear to the horizon on the 4th. Strategic positioning, old habits from his marshalling days. "It's small," he said, suddenly seeing his home through strangers' eyes. Adobe walls, tin roof, deep porches front and back. The barn stood solid, corrals in good repair, but it was a bachelor's place. Functional, not welcoming. "It's perfect." She said it like she meant it. Defensible approaches, water access, sightlines to the road. You picked well. His hands tightened on the reins. No Eastern woman talked about defensive positions. "You running from something, Mrs. Boone." The name made her flinch. "We're all running from something." "That's not an answer." She turned those green eyes on him, and for a moment he saw something raw and desperate behind the composed mask. "You want me to leave, say the word? I'll walk back to town right now." He should say yes, should turn this wagon around and put her on the next eastbound train. His gut screamed warnings, and his gut had kept him alive through range wars and Apache raids. But something else, something he'd thought dead and buried with Sarah, stirred in his chest. Not attraction, though Lord knew she was beautiful enough to stop a man's breath. Something deeper, recognition, maybe. The look of someone else who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what lay beyond them. "No," he heard himself say. "We made a bargain." She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then, so quiet, he almost missed it. "I'll keep your trust. I swear it." The house felt different with her in it. She moved through the rooms like smoke, examining everything with those sharp eyes. The kitchen, functional but spare. The main room with its cold fireplace and leather chairs. The narrow stairs to the loft bedroom. "Where do I—" she started. "There's a room off the kitchen. Was going to be for— Never mind. It's yours." Relief and something else disappointment crossed her face. "Thank you." While she settled her few belongings, Caleb stood on the porch watching the sun paint the buttes crimson. Behind him, he heard her moving about, the soft rustle of fabric, the careful placement of items. No humming, no singing. She'd taken his rule about music to heart already. The creak of a floorboard made him turn. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight, the violin case in her hands. "Where should I put this?" "Thought I was clear about music." "You were, but this isn't just music." She opened the case, revealing an instrument that had seen miles and years. Its wood worn smooth by handling. "This is memory, safety, the only thing that's been mine since—" She stopped herself, but not before he heard the weight of unfinished story. "Barn," he said roughly. "Keep it in the tack room if you must." Her knuckles went white on the case, but she nodded. "I'll put it away after supper." The meal was simple beans, cornbread, the last of the preserved peaches. She ate like someone who'd known hunger, efficient and without complaint. He found himself studying her hands, too soft for farm work, but bearing small scars that spoke of harder labor than society tease. "You cook well," he offered. "Survival skill." She met his eyes. "Like shooting and running and keeping secrets." The honesty of it rocked him. "You planning to tell me what you're running from? When it won't get you killed." The words hung between them like a challenge. Before he could respond, she stood and began clearing dishes, her movements sharp with suppressed energy. Outside, a coyote howled, the sound carrying across the desert like a lost soul's lament. Lila's hands stilled on the plates. "They always sound so lonesome," she said. "They're calling their pack, letting them know where home is." She turned to look at him, and for one moment her mask slipped entirely. He saw fear there, and determination, and a wild hope that made his chest tight. "Must be nice," she said, "having a pack to call." Later, after she'd retreated to her room and the house settled into night sounds, Caleb sat by the cold fireplace with a glass of whiskey. Through the kitchen door, left slightly ajar, he could see the faint line of light under her room. He thought about the telegram he'd sent to the matrimonial agency, specifically requesting someone plain, quiet, steady, someone who wouldn't disturb his carefully ordered life or awaken feelings better left buried. Instead, they'd sent him a woman who wore secrets like armor and carried a violin like a weapon, a woman whose wild beauty had already shattered his first rule. Don't notice, don't want, don't feel. Through the window, dust devils danced in the moonlight, spinning and dissipating like promises made in haste. Somewhere in her room, his unexpected bride was likely sitting awake, planning her next move in whatever game had driven her to his door. He should be worried, should be angry at the deception, the lies, the danger she'd brought to his threshold. Instead, Caleb Boone found himself thinking about green eyes and the way she'd gripped that violin case, like letting go meant losing the last piece of her soul. He understood that feeling, understood it too well. Tomorrow, he'd teach her to milk the cow and mend fence. He'd show her the boundaries of his land and the rules of survival in this hard country. He'd keep his distance and his heart locked away where it belonged. But tonight, listening to her move restlessly in the room beyond, he allowed himself one moment of honesty. He expected a plain frontier bride. Her wild beauty shattered his rules and tamed his soul. The thought came unbidden, poetic nonsense from a man who dealt in cattle and weather. He drowned it in whiskey and climbed the stairs to his empty bed, pretending not to notice how the house already smelled different with her in it lavender soap and something else. Something wild, like sage after rain. In the morning, they'd begin the careful dance of strangers bound by law and necessity. He'd teach her his world, and maybe, if he was very careful, she wouldn't destroy it with her secrets. But deep in his gut, where truth lived alongside old wounds, Caleb knew it was already too late. The woman sleeping in his kitchen room had brought change as surely as storm clouds brought rain. The only question now was whether they'd survive it. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness like a rusty nail through barnwood. Lila jolted awake, momentarily lost in the unfamiliar room. Kitchen smells old grease, dried herbs. Yesterday's cornbread grounded her. Right, Caleb Boone's house. Her house now, legally speaking. Through the thin wall, she heard him moving about with the deliberate quiet of a man used to solitude. Boots on wood, the splash of water in a basin, the creak of leather as he dressed. She'd memorized these sounds in 3 days, mapping his routines like she'd once mapped telegraph routes. By the time she emerged, dressed in the practical skirt and blouse she'd bought from Murphy's with her last coins, Caleb stood at the stove brewing coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. "Morning," he said without turning. "Morning." They moved around each other like wary cats, careful not to touch in the small kitchen. He'd laid out work clothes on her chair canvas pants, a man's shirt, worn but clean. "Can't ride in skirts," he said to her questioning look. "Not practical." The town women won't approve. Town women don't work cattle. She changed while he headed to the barn, grateful for the privacy and the practical clothes. The pants fit well enough with the belt cinched tight. Sarah's, she realized, and pushed down the twist of guilt. The dead had no use for canvas and cotton. Outside, the morning air held a crisp edge that would burn off within the hour. Caleb waited by the corral with 2 horses saddled his big bay gelding and a smaller paint mare with intelligent eyes. "This is Buttercup," he said, running a hand down the mare's neck. "She's got sense and a smooth gait. Treat her right, she'll keep you safe." Lila approached slowly, letting the horse smell her hand before stroking the velvet nose. "Hello, beautiful. You've been around horses." Some truth, for once. The Pinkertons had insisted their operators know basic riding, though she'd far exceeded basic during her escape west. He showed her how to check the cinch, adjust stirrups, read the horse's mood through ear position and tail swishing. His hands were patient, methodical, scarred from rope burns and wire cuts. Teacher's hands, despite their roughness. "Mount from the left," he said. "Always, even if she's bomb-proof. Habits keep you alive out here." She swung up easily, settling into the worn saddle like coming home. His eyes narrowed slightly, another skill that didn't match her supposed Eastern background, but he said nothing. They rode the property lines as the sun climbed, him pointing out landmarks and boundaries, the creek that marked the eastern edge, running low but steady, the salt lick where deer gathered at dusk, the box canyon where cattle like to hide during storms. "Water rights are filed proper," he said, guiding his bay around a cluster of prickly pear. "But that doesn't mean much to some folks. Some folks like Ezra Pike." He reined up sharp, studying her with those gray eyes that missed nothing. "You know about Pike. Murphy's wife mentioned him. Said he owns the double bar. Controls most of the water north of here." "Controls" is a polite word for it. He nudged his horse forward. "Pike's got legal claims to Dutchman's Creek and 2 springs. Rest he just takes, counting on folks being too scared or too poor to fight back. But not you. Not yet. My water comes from Little Sage Creek, and I've got papers dating to '68. He's made offers to buy, but this is home." He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt exposed as a rabbit in short grass. "Yeah, this is home." They worked through the morning, checking fence lines and noting repairs needed. He taught her to spot weak posts, loose wire, places where cattle had pushed through seeking better grazing. Her hands blistered quickly on the wire stretcher, but she bit down complaints and kept working. "You're tougher than you look," he said, watching her reset a post that had listed sideways. "Looks are deceiving." "I'm beginning to notice that." Around midday, they stopped at a high point overlooking the valley. The view stretched for miles, red rocks and sage, the silver thread of the creek, dust devils spinning lazy patterns across the flats. Lila pulled off her hat, letting the wind catch her sweat-damp hair. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. Beautiful doesn't keep cattle fed or wells flowing. But his voice held affection despite the practical words. "See that green line to the north? That's Pike's land. Notice how it's greener than ours." She could see it, a verdant strip that mocked the drier grass of the smaller ranches. "He's hoarding water." "Can't prove it. He's got a judge in Santa Fe who likes his donations to the Republican Party. Sheriff Dalton retired last year after his barn mysteriously caught fire. New sheriff's young, means well, but Pike owns him too." Owns is harsh. Let's say Pike provides guidance. They headed back as the afternoon heat built, stopping to water the horses at a small spring. While the animals drank, Caleb showed her how to check for hoof problems, signs of lameness, the early warnings of colic. "A lame horse out here might as well be a death sentence," he said, picking a stone from Buttercup's frog. "You get thrown 20 miles from nowhere. You better hope your horse can carry you home." Or that someone comes looking." He straightened, meeting her eyes over the mare's back. "I'd come looking." The simple statement hit her harder than any flowery declaration could have. She turned away, pretending to adjust her saddle, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. Back at the ranch, he set her to working the garden while he repaired tack in the barn. The vegetables struggled in the hard soil, tomatoes barely setting fruit, beans climbing half-heartedly up poles that needed replacing. She hauled water from the well, bucket after bucket, until her shoulders screamed and her fancy Eastern hands looked like they'd been through a grinder. "Only water at dusk," Caleb called from the barn door. "Loses less to evaporation." She nodded, filing the information away with all the other survival rules he'd been teaching her. When to move cattle, how to read weather and cloud formations, which snakes to fear and which to leave be. Each lesson delivered matter of fact, without judgment of her ignorance. As she worked, she became aware of being watched. Not Caleb, he'd disappeared into the barn's shadows. This was different. A prickle between her shoulder blades that had saved her life more than once. She kept working, eyes scanning the horizon without seeming to. There a flash of movement on the ridge. Sun on metal. Maybe field glasses. She bent to her weeding, mind racing. Too soon. She'd hoped for more time before they found her trail. The dinner bell saved her from immediate decision. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, and she forced her face into calm lines. "Company coming," she said quietly as they walked to the house. He didn't break stride. "Saw them? Been there an hour, maybe more." "You didn't say anything. Figured you'd tell me when you're ready." He held the door for her, a courtesy that still surprised her. Or when you've got no choice. May Thompson arrived while they were washing dishes, her wagon raising dust clouds visible half a mile off. A sturdy woman in her 50s. She dressed practical and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd birthed babies and buried husbands with equal competence. "Brought preserves," she announced, hefting a basket onto the kitchen table. "Figured you could use some female company. Lila, man like Caleb doesn't know the first thing about making a woman feel welcome." "I'm managing," Lila said, but smiled to soften it. "Course you are. Heard you were wearing pants and working fence." Prudence Hale about had apoplexy when Murphy's wife told her. Mrs. Hale is entitled to her opinions." May laughed, a rich sound that filled the kitchen. "Diplomatic. You'll need that. Prudence runs the Ladies' Aid Society like Wellington ran Waterloo. You haven't been to church yet?" "This Sunday," Caleb said from the doorway. "Figured we should show faces for rumors get worse." "Rumors are already flying. But yes, appearance helps. Lila, you'll need a proper dress. Something that says respectable married woman, loud enough to drown out the gossip about your arrival." "I have a dress." "You have an Eastern dress that marks you as different. Trust me on this." May studied her with shrewd eyes. "You're pretty enough to make enemies without trying. Best not give them extra ammunition." While May chattered about patterns and fabric, Lila found herself relaxing incrementally. The older woman's presence buffered the tension between her and Caleb, made the house feel less like a fortress under siege. But as May prepared to leave, she pulled Lila aside on the porch. "Word of advice, woman to woman, this territory's hard on marriages. Harder still when they start with secrets. Whatever you're running from, you'd best tell him before it tells itself." After she'd gone, Lila stood watching the dust settle while Caleb finished evening chores. The watcher on the ridge had vanished, but she knew they'd be back. Pike's men. Checking the new arrival, or had Hank Graves finally tracked her this far? "She's right, you know." Caleb's voice behind her made her jump. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking tired and dusty and solid as the mountains. "About the dress." "About the secrets." She turned to face him, this man who'd taken her in without questions, taught her without condescension, given her space to breathe when every instinct probably screamed at him to demand answers. "Saturday. she said. After town, after church, after we've established I'm a respectable married woman who just happens to wear pants. I'll tell you everything Saturday night. And if trouble comes before then we'll handle it together. The words surprised her. She'd been alone so long. The idea of together felt foreign on her tongue. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Together, then. Inside, she helped him with his bookkeeping, her quick mind easily grasping the economics of small ranching. Cattle prices, feed costs, water rights fees, all balanced on a knife's edge of survival. You're one bad season from bankruptcy, she observed, adding a column of figures. Most folks out here are, Pike counts on it, waits till you're desperate, then offers just enough to seem like salvation. But you won't sell. My father homesteaded this land, fought Apaches, drought, and locusts to hold it. Sarah's buried on that hill. I won't. He stopped, jaw tight. Tell me about her. The question hung between them like dust in lamplight. She expected him to refuse, to retreat behind his walls. Instead, he leaned back, eyes distant. Met her in Kansas City. I was transporting a prisoner, stopped at her father's store for supplies. She was reading behind-the-counter poetry, if you can believe it, in a frontier supply store, reading Wordsworth like it was the most natural thing in the world. You loved her. From that first moment. Took me 6 months to work up the courage to court her. Another year to convince her father I was worth his daughter. We had 3 years here before the fever took her. I'm sorry. Don't be. Those were good years. Best of my life. He met her eyes. But she's gone. And I'm here. And that's the way of things. Man can't live in the past forever. The words held weight, an offering of sorts. She wanted to reciprocate, to share her own losses. But Saturday felt safer. Instead, she reached across the table and touched his hand briefly, the first voluntary contact between them. Thank you for telling me. He turned his hand palm up, catching her fingers for just a moment before letting go. Better get some sleep. Tomorrow we're moving cattle to the north pasture. It'll be a long day. Alone in her room. Lila sat on the narrow bed and pulled out the small leather journal hidden in her carpetbag's lining. The encoded entries looked like poetry to casual eyes, her own protection against discovery. But decoded, they told a different story: names, dates, telegraph intercepts that traced a web of corruption from Texas to Colorado. Ezra Pike's name appeared frequently, always in connection with stolen cattle, altered brands, and water rights mysteriously transferred. But the worst entries detailed the murders rangers shot from ambush, homesteaders burned out, anyone who threatened the syndicate's operations eliminated. She'd stumbled onto it by accident, working late at the Western Union office in Denver, a misdirected message, a moment's curiosity, and suddenly she'd held dynamite in her hands. Going to the law had seemed logical until she'd learned how deep the corruption ran. Now Hank Graves wanted her dead, and the ledger was the only thing keeping her alive. As long as it existed, she had leverage. Destroy it, and she was just another loose end to tie off. Through the wall, she heard Caleb moving about, preparing for bed. A good man, she thought, decent and honorable in a world that rewarded neither quality. He deserved better than the trouble she'd brought to his door. But Saturday was still 4 days away. 4 days to pretend at normalcy, to learn the rhythms of ranch life, to memorize the sound of his footsteps and the way morning light caught in his hair. 4 days before truth shattered whatever fragile thing grew between them. She blew out the lamp and lay in darkness, listening to coyotes sing their lonely songs to the stars. Tomorrow, she'd help move cattle and try not to notice how Caleb's competent hands made hard work look easy. She'd wear pants and scandalize church ladies and pretend her past wasn't galloping toward them like a runaway horse. But tonight, she allowed herself one small dream that Saturday might never come, that she could remain Lila Boone forever, learning to love the land and the man who worked it with equal patience. Outside, a dust devil spun through the yard. Scattering chicken feathers and dried leaves, a tiny tornado reshaping the landscape one grain at a time. Like secrets, she thought. Like change. Like the terrifying possibility of home. The storm built all afternoon. A wall of brown fury rolling across the desert like God's own reckoning. Caleb watched it from the porch, calculating distances and wind speed, that old marshal's habit of measuring danger before it arrived. How bad? Lila stood beside him. Close enough he could smell the lavender soap she'd bought from Murphy's. Bad enough. Need to move the herd closer. Get them in the box canyon before this hits. She was already turning toward the barn. I'll saddle the horses. No. He caught her arm, felt her tense beneath his touch. Too dangerous. I'll take Jesse. Jesse's a boy. Who's been working cattle since he could sit a saddle? You've been here a week. Her chin came up. That stubborn tilt he'd learned meant trouble. And in that week, I've proven I can ride and rope well enough. You need every hand, and you know it. She was right. Damn her. The herd numbered 60 head, spread across the north pasture where grazing was best. With a storm like this coming, they'd spook at the first thunder crack. 2 riders wouldn't be enough if they scattered. Stay close, he said finally. Don't try anything fancy. If they stampede, get to high ground and wait it out. You've told me. She squeezed his hand briefly. Trust me. Trust, such a simple word for such a complicated thing. Jesse Quintero waited by the corral, his young face grave under a hat too big for his 16 years. His father had worked for Caleb before consumption took him. The boy had stayed on, sending wages home to his mother and sisters in town. Storm's gonna be a bad one. Mr. Boone, he said, checking his lariat. That's why we're moving them now. Lila's riding with us. Jesse's eyes widened slightly. A woman working cattle still shocked him, but he nodded. Yes, sir. They rode out as the first fat raindrops splattered in the dust, leaving dark coins that vanished almost instantly. The wind picked up, whipping Lila's hair from under her hat, sending tumbleweeds cartwheeling across their path. The cattle felt it too. 60 head of longhorn and crossbreed, usually placid as milk cows, now milled restlessly. Their eyes rolled white, and the led steer, a big brindle Caleb called Moses, kept throwing his head up to test the wind. Fan out, Caleb ordered. Jesse, take the left flank. Lila, right. Push them easy toward the canyon. No sudden moves. They worked well together. He had to admit, Jesse knew cattle like a preacher knew scripture, anticipating their moves, keeping them bunched. And Lila, she rode like she'd been born to it, steady and sure, placing herself exactly where needed. The sky darkened to the color of fresh bruises. Lightning flickered in the approaching wall of dust, and thunder rumbled like distant artillery. The cattle's nervousness infected the horses. Even steady Buttercup danced sideways, fighting the bit. They'd moved maybe half the herd when it happened. A jackrabbit, flushed from the sage, burst directly under Moses's nose. The big steer bellowed and wheeled, slamming into 2 others. The panic spread like wildfire through dry grass. Stampede! Jesse's shout barely carried over the sudden roar of hooves. 60 head of cattle turned as one, a brown river of horn and muscle flowing away from the storm, toward the open desert where they'd run themselves to death or off a cliff, whichever came first. Caleb spurred his bay, riding hard to turn the leaders. Standard practice: get ahead, turn them into themselves, make them mill in a circle until the panic passed. Jesse knew it too, was already racing along the left side, whipping his hat at the lead steers. But Lila did something else entirely. She dismounted Lord knew when and stood on a flat boulder maybe 20 feet from the stampede's path as Caleb watched in horror. She pulled something from behind the rock, her violin case. What the hell? She had the instrument out and under her chin before he could finish the thought. The first notes rose impossibly clear despite the chaos, not a song exactly, more a rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, low and resonant, matching the thunder of hooves. The lead cattle's ears flicked, Moses, that big brindle bastard, actually slowed. The violin sang louder now, Lila drawing the bow in long, sure strokes that seemed to pull at something primal in the animal's brains. Caleb found himself riding alongside the herd rather than trying to turn it, mesmerized by the sound. The panic was bleeding out of them, replaced by confusion. Then something almost like calm. The stampede slowed to a run, then a trot, finally milling to a stop not 50 yards from where Lila stood. She kept playing, the melody shifting to something soothing, almost like a lullaby. The cattle stood heaving, steam rising from their backs, but the wild terror had left their eyes. "I'll be damned," Jessie whispered, riding up beside Caleb. "Never seen nothing like that." Neither had Caleb. He dismounted, ground-tying his horse, and walked toward his wife. She lowered the violin as he approached, and he saw her hands trembling. "Where did you learn that?" "Chicago stockyards." Her voice came out rough. "Old Polish man used to play accordion to calm the cattle before slaughter. Said music spoke to the part of them that remembered being calves, safe with their mothers. I adapted it for violin. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." She met his eyes, defiant and vulnerable at once. And neither were the cattle. He wanted to shake her, wanted to forbid her from ever taking such risks again, wanted to pull her against him and feel her heart beating, proof she'd survived her own recklessness. "Instead," he said, "we need to get them to shelter. Storm's almost here." They worked quickly, the cattle now docile as house cats. The box canyon lay only a quarter-mile distant, a natural corral with high walls and an overhang that would shelter them from the worst of the wind. They'd barely gotten the last steer inside when the storm hit in earnest. The world disappeared in a brown wall. Dust-filled eyes, nose, mouth, turned day to twilight. The horses huddled together, rumps to the wind, and the three humans pressed against the canyon wall, bandanas tied over their faces. Caleb pulled Lila against him, shielding her with his body. She didn't protest, just pressed her face into his chest. He could feel her violin case digging into his ribs where she clutched it between them. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. When it finally began to ease, they emerged coughing and spitting mud. The cattle had weathered it well, packed tight under the overhang. A few minor cuts from flying debris, but nothing serious. "Let's get home," Caleb said, his voice raspy from dust. They rode slowly, the horses picking their way through new drifts of sand. The familiar landscape had changed, dunes where none had been before. Fences buried, a year's worth of topsoil relocated in an hour. Back at the ranch, Jessie headed to the bunkhouse after seeing to his horse. Caleb and Lila worked side by side in the barn, unsaddling, rubbing down, making sure no injuries had been missed in the field. "You broke my rule," he said finally. She paused in brushing Buttercup's coat. "About the music. About taking stupid risks. Would you rather lose the herd?" "I'd rather not lose you." The words hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. She set down the brush and turned to face him. "You barely know me." "I know enough." "No." She shook her head. "You know I can ride and cook and play violin. You don't know why I'm here, what I'm running from, what kind of danger I've brought to your door." "Then tell me." "Saturday. I promise Saturday." He stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "To hell with Saturday. Tell me now." She looked away. "Hank Graves. He runs stolen cattle from Texas to Colorado, using legitimate ranchers as cover. Changes brands, forges bills of sale, bribes inspectors. I have proof-encoded records from telegraph messages I wasn't supposed to see. And Pike is one of his main partners. They use the double bar to rest stolen herds, fatten them on that hoarded water before moving them north." She met his eyes again. "I was going to the federal marshals, but Graves has men everywhere. My contact in Denver turned up dead the day before our meeting, so I ran." Caleb processed this, his lawman's mind automatically cataloging the implications. The ledger, you have it with you. Hidden. Safe. It's my insurance. The only thing keeping Graves from just killing me outright, as long as he thinks I might have shared it with someone, sent copies somewhere. He has to be careful. But he's still looking. Yes, that was probably one of his scouts on the ridge the other day. Why didn't you go to another marshal? There are honest men. Are there? She laughed bitterly. The one in Denver was supposed to be honest too. I don't know who to trust anymore. You trusted me. No. She stepped close enough that he could feel her warmth. I married you because I was desperate. The trust that came after, when you taught me to read the desert, when you told me about Sarah, when you didn't demand answers I wasn't ready to give. He reached up, brushed a strand of dusty hair from her face. And now I trust you more than I've trusted anyone since this started, which terrifies me, because everyone I've trusted has ended up dead or betrayed me. I'm harder to kill than most. Don't, her voice broke. Don't joke about it. You don't know what Graves is capable of. I know what I'm capable of. He cupped her face in his hands. I was a marshal for 8 years. Faced down men who'd kill you for your boots. I've survived Apache raids and range wars and losing the woman I loved. I'm not afraid of some cattle thief with delusions of grandeur. She surged up on her toes and kissed him. Not gentle, not tentative, but desperate and fierce like the storm that had just passed. He responded in kind, backing her against the stall door, his hands tangling in her dust-caked hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. She pressed her forehead against his chest. I shouldn't have done that. Why? Because it makes leaving harder, and I will have to leave. Caleb, when Graves finds me, and he will, I won't let you die for my mistakes. That's my choice to make. No. She pulled away. It's not. You have Jesse depending on you, this ranch, a life worth living. I won't be the reason you lose all that. She fled before he could respond, her violin case clutched to her chest like armor. He heard her door close firmly, the sound of finality in it. Caleb stood alone in the barn, listening to the wind outside and the soft nickering of horses settling for the night. Through the walls, faint as a ghost, came the sound of violin music, not the steady rhythm that had calmed stampeding cattle, but something mournful and sweet, a lament for things that couldn't be. He'd told her about his rules, about order and control and not allowing disruptions, but she'd shattered all of that as easily as a stone through window glass. Her wild beauty, her desperate courage, her music that spoke to something he'd thought buried with Sarah, all of it had worked into his heart like water into stone, freezing and expanding until the rock cracked. The violin sang on, and Caleb did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He sat on a hay bale, put his head in his hands, and let himself feel the full weight of caring for someone who might disappear like smoke in a dust storm. Outside, coyotes added their voices to hers, a chorus of wild things calling to the moon through settling dust. And in the barn, a man who'd thought his heart safely buried discovered it had only been sleeping, waiting for the right song to wake it. The kitchen table looked like a battlefield of paper and ink. Lila sat hunched over the ledger, her hair falling loose from its pins, translating encoded entries by lamplight. Caleb paced behind her, each footstep precise as hammer blows. You should have told me sooner, he said for the 3rd time. And you would have done what sent me packing. She didn't look up from her work. Or worse, tried to arrest Graves yourself and gotten killed for your trouble. I would have protected you properly, set watches, fortified the ranch. Made yourself a target. She set down her pen, rubbing her temples. This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You're already planning to fight a war you can't win. I've won harder fights than this. Not against men like Graves. He doesn't fight fair. Caleb. He doesn't call you out at high noon for a proper duel. He burns your barn with you inside it. He poisons your water. He makes your loved ones disappear. The words hung between them like smoke. Outside, Jesse was settling the horses for the night, his off-key humming drifting through the walls. Such a normal sound for such an abnormal evening.
Show me.
Caleb said finally. Show me what you have. She turned the ledger toward him. Her handwriting was precise, each decoded entry dated and annotated. Names, dates, locations. A paper trail of theft and murder spanning 3 territories. Here, she pointed to an entry from 6 months ago. 50 heads stolen from the Rocking J in Texas, rebranded at a way station near Amarillo. Graves sold them to Pike, who mixed them with his legitimate herd. She flipped pages. And here a federal inspector who asked too many questions, found shot by rustlers 2 days later. Caleb studied the entries, his marshal's mind cataloging patterns. You have enough here to hang him twice over. If I could find an honest judge. But look, she showed him a list of names. Judges, marshals, senators, all receiving payments through Pike's Bank in Santa Fe. The corruption goes to the territorial capital. There are honest men in the federal system. Judge Porter in Denver was at Pike's Christmas party last year. I served the champagne myself when I was hiding as household staff. She laughed bitterly. That's how I got access to some of these records. Pike liked having an educated woman serving drinks. Never occurred to him I could read the papers on his desk. Caleb sat across from her, processing this information. His wife and lord. How strange to think that word had been playing a dangerous game long before she'd stepped off that train in Red Butte. The violin, he said suddenly. That's how you survived, playing in houses, gathering information. Among other things, telegraph work when I could get it, seamstress work when I couldn't, whatever kept me moving and hidden. She met his eyes. I'm not proud of the deception, but pride's a luxury I couldn't afford. And the marriage advertisement. Desperation. I'd run out of places to hide. Figured a small ranch in the middle of nowhere might buy me time to think. She smiled ruefully. Didn't count on caring what happened to you. Before he could respond, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Multiple riders, coming fast. Caleb was moving before the sound fully registered. Grabbing the shotgun from beside the door. Stay inside, he ordered. Like hell. But he was already on the porch, weapon ready but not raised. 6 men reined up in the yard, Deputy Sheriff Silas Reyes at their head. The young lawman's face was grave in the lamplight spilling from the doorway. Caleb, Mrs. Boone. He touched his hat brim. Sorry for the late hour. What brings you out? Silas. Official business. I'm afraid we've had a complaint filed. Need to search your property. On whose authority? Judge Hutchins signed the warrant this afternoon. Silas produced a folded paper. Clearly uncomfortable. Mister, Pike says you've been harboring stolen cattle. Claims he's got witnesses seen you moving double-bar branded stock. That's a lie and you know it. What I know doesn't matter. I've got a legal warrant. His eyes flicked to Lila in the doorway. Best if you both wait inside while we check the barn and corrals. Won't take long. Caleb wanted to fight, to stand on his property rights and tell them all to go to hell. But the other 5 men were Pikes, their hands casual near their weapons. This wasn't the time or place for a confrontation. Search away, he said finally. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find. They tore through the barn like locusts, throwing hay bales aside, emptying grain bins, even prying up floorboards. Caleb and Lila watched from the porch, her hand gripping his arm tight enough to bruise. They're not looking for cattle, she whispered. I know. One of Pike's men emerged from the barn carrying her violin case. Look what I found. Deputy, hidden in the tack room. That's mine, Lila said, starting forward. Caleb caught her. Easy. Silas examined the case, clearly puzzled. It's a violin. Jeb, not exactly criminal evidence. Could be hidden compartments. Jeb Crow suggested. That same man Caleb had noted watching their property. Better check thorough. No. Lila pulled free of Caleb's grip as Jeb drew his knife.
Please, it was my mother's.
Jeb's smile was ugly as he sliced through the case lining. The violin tumbled out onto the dirt, its varnished wood gleaming in the lamplight. He kicked it aside, continuing to shred the case. Nothing here, deputy. Guess we better check the house next. The warrant specifies outbuildings only, Silas said firmly. We're done here. Pike won't like. Pike's not the law, I am. The young deputy's voice hardened. Mount up. We're leaving. They went reluctantly. Jeb, last of all. As he passed Caleb, he leaned down from his saddle. This ain't over. Boone, you're harboring a thief and worse. We'll prove it. After they'd gone, Lila knelt in the dirt, gathering her violin with shaking hands. One of the tuning pegs had cracked, and dust clung to the varnish, but the instrument seemed otherwise intact. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. It's not your fault. She stood, cradling the violin. This is what I brought to your door, what I warned you about. Come inside. We need to plan. They spent the next hour encoding her ledger entries into a new cipher, one based on a passage from the Bible that Caleb chose at random. If Pike's men found the book, it would look like religious study notes. We need to get this to someone who can act on it, Caleb said. Someone outside Pike's influence. There's a federal prosecutor in Austin, James Thornwright. I've heard he's honest, but Austin's 500 miles. Too far, too dangerous. He thought for a moment. What about the newspaper in Tucson? The Citizen has no love for Pike. And what hope public pressure forces an investigation? She shook her head. Pike would burn us out before the ink dried. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Caleb grabbed the shotgun again, motioning Lila behind him. It's May Thompson, came the voice. Got Jesse with me. Need to talk. Caleb opened the door cautiously. May bustled in, Jesse behind her carrying a basket that smelled of fresh bread and preserves. Silas stopped by my place, May announced. Told me about the search. Figured you might need some friendly faces about now. It's late for a social call. May. It's late for a lot of things. She set the basket on the table, her movements brisk. Jesse, tell them what you told me. The young man shifted nervously. I was in town this afternoon, picking up grain at Murphy's. Heard Jeb Crow talking to some men I didn't recognize. They were asking about Mrs. Boone, if she'd brought any packages or books with her. What else? May prompted. One of them, fancy-dressed fellow, said something about checking the other ranches. Said if they couldn't find what they wanted here, maybe her friends were hiding it. Lila sank into a chair. They'll tear the whole valley apart looking for that ledger. Which is why we're not going to let them, May said firmly. I've lived here 30 years, buried 2 husbands and raised 4 children in this valley. I'll be damned if I let Pike and some outsider terrorize good people. May, you don't understand. I understand plenty. Girl, you think you're the first woman to show up in the territory with secrets. Half the folks out here are running from something. The question is, are you worth protecting? May looked at Caleb. Well, you've lived with her 2 weeks now. Is she worth the risk? Caleb didn't hesitate. Yes. Then we protect our own. May turned to Jesse. You still remember that hideout you and the other boys built up in Skeleton Canyon? Yes, ma'am, but it's just a cave. A cave nobody else knows about. Could hide someone there for days if needed. She looked at Lila. Might come to that. I won't hide while others take risks for me. You'll do what's necessary to survive, May said sharply. Pride's a luxury in times like these. They talked until midnight, planning contingencies. Jesse would carry word to the other small ranchers, warning them about potential searches. May would organize the women, setting up a communication network that could move information faster than Pike's men could ride. What about the ledger? Lila asked. It's no good hidden. We need to get it to someone who can use it. I might know someone, Jesse offered hesitantly. My cousin Miguel rides freight guard between here and Tucson. He's taking a shipment out day after tomorrow. Could carry a package to the federal office there. Too risky, Caleb said. Pike has men watching the roads. Not the old Apache trail through the mountains. Miguel knows paths white men never mapped. It was thin, but better than nothing. They agreed to prepare a copy of the most damning entries, encode them in the new cipher, and have Jesse deliver it to Miguel tomorrow night. After May and Jesse left, Caleb and Lila sat alone in the kitchen. The violin lay on the table between them, its cracked peg a reminder of how quickly things could shatter. You could still run, he said quietly. Take a fresh horse. Head for California. I'd give you money. No, Lila. I said no. She met his eyes. I'm done running, done letting fear drive me from place to place like tumbleweed. Besides, her voice softened, I made a promise to try to be what you need. What I need is you alive. What you need is a partner, someone who stands beside you when trouble comes, not behind you. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Let me be that. Let me help fight this. He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses that had formed from ranch work. Such small hands to carry such heavy burdens. All right, he said finally. We fight together, but on my terms. You follow my lead. No heroics like with the stampede. And if I tell you to run, I'll consider it. She smiled at his exasperated look. That's the best you'll get from me. Marshal Boone. Former Marshal. Not in here. She tapped his chest. In here. You're still the lawman who believes in justice, who stands up to men like Pike because it's right, not because it's safe. That man got his wife killed. The words fell between them like stones. Lila's hand tightened on his. Tell me. He'd never spoken of it, not even to May, who'd helped bury Sarah. But sitting here with danger circling their small haven, he found the words coming. I was transporting a prisoner to trial. Man named Hayes. Killed a family over water rights. His brothers decided to break him loose. Set up an ambush on the road. I saw it coming. Managed to ford up in some rocks. The gunfight lasted hours. He paused, remembering the heat, the thirst, the endless ricochets of lead on stone. Sarah was supposed to stay in town while I was gone, but she got word I was pinned down. Gathered some men to ride out. They broke the ambush, but Hayes got loose in the confusion. Found Sarah tending wounded. His voice went flat. Shot her before I could stop him. She died in my arms while Hayes laughed. Oh, Caleb. I killed him, not in the heat of battle, not defending myself. Executed him right there in the dirt next to my wife's body. Then I turned in my badge and came here to forget. But you didn't forget. No, just learned to live with it. Until you showed up and reminded me that some fights are worth having, even if you might lose everything. She stood and came around the table, settling onto his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of lavender and dust that had become home. I won't let history repeat, she whispered against his neck. We'll beat them. Caleb, together. He held her tighter, wanting to believe it. Outside, wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, men plotted their destruction. But for this moment, in this kitchen that smelled of coffee and bread and the faint resin of violin strings, they had each other. It would have to be enough. The drought had teeth. It gnawed at the land with patient hunger, turning grass to ash and hope to dust. 3 weeks without rain, and the Little Sage Creek had shrunk to a muddy trickle, barely deep enough to wet a horse's hooves. Caleb knelt by the depleted stream, running calculations in his head. At this rate, they had maybe 10 days before the water gave out entirely. The cattle were already showing signs of distress, ribs prominent, eyes dull, gathering in sullen clusters around the failing water source. How bad? Lila stood behind him, carrying empty buckets that should have been full. Bad enough. He rose, dusting his knees. We'll have to start hauling from the backup spring, 2 miles each way, and it's barely running either. She set down the buckets, shading her eyes to study the northern horizon where Pike's land showed impossibly green. It doesn't make sense. We're all pulling from the same watershed. Why does he have water when nobody else does? Good lawyers and better politicians, Caleb said. But the question nagged at him too. Even with superior water rights, Pike shouldn't have that much advantage in a drought this severe. They spent the morning hauling water, bucket by bucket, barrel by barrel. Jesse worked alongside them, the three of them establishing a grinding rhythm fill, load, drive, empty, repeat. By noon, they'd barely watered half the herd, and the spring was visibly lower. "Can't keep this up," Jesse said, pouring the last of his barrel into the trough. "Killing ourselves to watch them die slow." "Nobody's dying," Caleb said firmly. "Not the cattle, not us. We'll find another way." But privately, he was running out of options. The other ranchers were suffering too. The Hendersons had already sold their herd at a loss, and word was the Paulson place stood abandoned. Another casualty of Pike's expanding empire. That evening, Silas Reyes rode in just as they were finishing supper. The deputy looked tired, older than his years, dust caked in the lines around his eyes. "Caleb, Mrs. Boone." He accepted the coffee Lila offered gratefully. "Wish this was a social call." "More warrants?" Caleb asked. "No, thank God. Judge Hutchins had an attack of conscience. Or maybe Pike forgot to pay him this month. Either way, he's not signing any more search papers without real evidence." Silas took a long drink of coffee. "But that's not why I'm here. You know the old Shadow Wash Trail?" "Through the canyon, yeah. Used it for moving cattle before the railroad came through. Might want to ride up that way, quietly. Maybe take a look at what's changed since the last time you were there." The deputy set down his empty cup and stood. "That's all I can say, officially. I was never here, but Caleb," he paused at the door, "take guns, and maybe a few sticks of dynamite if you've got them." After he left, Caleb and Lila sat in silence, digesting the implications. "He's trying to help," Lila said finally, "without openly defying Pike." "Which means whatever's up there is bad enough to risk his job over." Caleb stood. Decision made. "We ride at first light. Jesse can watch the ranch." "I'm coming with you." He'd learned better than to argue when she used that tone. "Fine, but we go careful. Scout first, if it's what I think it is." "A dam." Her green eyes sparked with anger. "He's dammed the watershed, stealing water from everyone downstream." "Can't prove that from here. Need to see for ourselves." "Document it somehow." "I can sketch. Another skill from my checkered past." She smiled grimly. "Amazing what you learn when you're gathering evidence of crimes." They prepared through the evening, checking weapons, packing supplies, studying the old maps Caleb had from his marshalling days. The Shadow Wash Trail hadn't been used in years, would be treacherous even in good conditions, in drought, with desperate men potentially guarding something illegal. It could be deadly. Just after midnight, Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. He was out of bed and pulling on boots before his conscious mind fully processed the danger. Through the window, orange light flickered in the barn's upper loft. "Fire!" He shook Lila awake. "Get Jesse, get the horses out." They worked with desperate efficiency born of prairie living. Fire was the demon everyone feared, especially in drought. Lila ran for the bell, its bronze voice shattering the night, while Caleb and Jesse plunged into the smoke-filled barn. The horses screamed in terror, fighting their stalls as smoke thickened. Caleb threw open doors, dodging hooves and teeth, trusting the animal's instinct for survival to drive them out. Buttercup was trapped, her lead rope tangled in the manger. He slashed it with his knife, slapped her rump hard, sent her bolting for safety. "The tech room," Jesse shouted over the roar of flames. Their saddles, bridles, all the equipment they needed for survival, Caleb made the hard choice. "Leave it, get out." They stumbled into the yard as the loft collapsed, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Lila was there with buckets, but they all knew it was futile. In this drought, with their water so scarce, they could only watch their barn become a pyre. "Look!" Jesse pointed to the ground near the barn's rear corner. Boot prints in the dust, and the sharp smell of kerosene cutting through the smoke. "Bastards," Lila breathed. Caleb said nothing, just watched months of hay and grain turn to ash, without feed. In this drought, the cattle would starve if thirst didn't claim them first. Pike didn't need to steal their land. He just had to make it impossible to survive on it. By dawn, only smoking ruins remained. The horses huddled in the corral, traumatized but alive. Mae Thompson arrived with her wagon as the sun cleared the horizon, took one look at the destruction, and started organizing. "Jesse, you ride to the Hendersons, see if they've got hay to spare. Lila, help me load what supplies I brought. Caleb," she fixed him with a steady gaze, "you do what needs doing. We'll hold things together here." He understood. The trip to Shadow Wash couldn't wait. Not now. Every day meant less water, less hope, less chance of survival for the small ranchers Pike was systematically destroying. They rode out an hour later, Lila on Buttercup and Caleb on his bay, moving through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts. The old trail was worse than he remembered, washed out in places, choked with deadfall in others. They picked their way carefully, alert for both natural hazards and human threats. The sun was full up when they heard it, the sound of falling water where no water should be. They dismounted, tying the horses out of sight, and crept forward on foot. The canyon opened up ahead, and what they saw made Caleb's blood run cold. A dam, not crude or temporary, but a proper construction of timber and stone, 50 feet across and 20 high. Behind it, a small lake had formed, hoarding what should have been flowing downstream to a dozen ranches. A spillway controlled the output, reduced to a trickle that explained the dying creeks below. "Son of a bitch," Caleb whispered. But that wasn't the worst part. Below the dam, hidden in a box canyon, lay evidence of Pike's other business holding pens filled with cattle bearing altered brands, the infrastructure of large-scale rustling. There must be 200 head down there. Lila breathed. All stolen. Look at the brands. Running ironwork. But sloppy. Those were Henderson's cattle, and those belonged to a spread in Texas. See the original mark under the burn. Lila was already sketching, her pencil flying across the paper, documenting everything. Caleb watched the camp below, counting men, noting routines. 6 guards visible. Probably more in the line shack by the pens. "We need to—" The click of a hammer cocking cut him off. They turned slowly to find Jeb Crow standing behind them, pistol aimed steady. "Well, well, the marshal and his whore come to spy." Jeb's smile was all teeth. "Mister, Pike's gonna be real pleased. Might even let me have some fun before we bury you." "You're making a mistake, Crow," Caleb said calmly. "Deputy Reyes knows we're here. We don't come back, he'll bring a posse." "That milksop boy, he ain't bringing nobody." Jeb gestured with the gun. "Now, move. Slow and easy. We're going down to see the boss." They had no choice. As they descended toward the camp, Caleb caught Lila's eye. She gave the slightest nod. She still had the sketches tucked in her shirt. Evidence, if they could somehow get it out. The guards converged as they entered camp, rough men with harder eyes. Caleb recognized some from wanted posters. Sam Briggs, horse thief, Marcus Vale, killed a man in Amarillo. Pike had assembled a small army of outlaws. "Put them in the shack," Jeb ordered. "Pike's coming up tomorrow. He can decide what to do with them." The line shack was small, stifling, with one window too tiny to squeeze through. They were shoved inside. The door barred from without. Through the thin walls, they could hear the guards laughing, making crude suggestions about Lila's fate.
I'm sorry, she whispered. This is my fault. If I hadn't come here...
Stop!
He pulled her close. We both knew the risks. Question now is how we get out. The sketches won't matter if we're dead. He examined their prison methodically. Solid construction. No loose boards. Nothing that could serve as a weapon. We need to wait. Watch for an opening.
Caleb, her voice was very small. If we don't make it.
We will.
But if we don't, I need you to know. She pressed her face against his chest. These weeks with you have been the first real home I've had since I was a child. Whatever happens, that was worth everything.
He tilted her chin up, kissed her with all the words he couldn't say. When they broke apart, her green eyes held tears, but also determination. When they open that door, she said, be ready. I have an idea. Night fell like a curtain. The guards built a fire, passing a bottle, their voices growing louder and less careful. Through the window, Caleb could see them relaxing, assuming their prisoners were helpless. Around midnight, Lila began to moan. Soft at first, then louder. Sounds of distress that brought exactly the reaction she'd anticipated. What's wrong with the woman? Someone asked. Who cares? That was Jeb. Let her suffer. But the moaning intensified, became screaming. Lila threw herself against the door, sobbing hysterically about pains in her stomach. Poison. Dying. Damn it, one guard muttered. Pike won't pay for damaged goods. Better check. It's a trick. Then we'll shoot them both. But if she dies and Pike wanted her alive, it's our necks. The bar lifted. The door opened. A guard peered in suspiciously. Lila collapsed at his feet, convulsing dramatically. He bent instinctively to help, and Caleb struck. A knee to the face, grabbed the gun, roll aside as shots splintered the door frame. Run! He shouted. They burst from the shack into chaos. Caleb fired twice, saw men diving for cover. Lila was ahead of him, racing for the horses with her skirts hiked up, moving like the wild thing she'd always been beneath the proper clothes. More shots. A bullet tugged at Caleb's sleeve. He spun, fired again, heard someone cry out. Then they were at the picket line, slashing ropes, leaping onto whatever horses were closest.
The dam,
Lila shouted. We have to... No ride. They thundered through the camp, scattering the fire, men diving aside, up the narrow trail. Hooves skidding on loose stone, gunfire echoing behind them. A horse screamed. The one behind Caleb went down, its rider cursing. They rode like demons through the darkness, trusting the horse's night vision and pure luck. Behind them, pursuit was clumsy, confused, men trying to organize in the chaos they'd left. It wasn't until they'd put miles between them and the dam that Caleb let them slow. The stolen horses were lathered, breathing hard, but they'd gained precious distance. We need to get to town, he said. Wire the federal marshal in Tucson. Get help before... The shot came from nowhere. Lila cried out, clutching her shoulder, swaying in the saddle. Caleb reached for her as more shots exploded from the rock's ambush. They'd ridden straight into ambush. He grabbed Buttercup's reins, spurring both horses off the trail into the maze of rocks and scrub. Bullets whined off stone, but darkness was their friend now. They crashed through brush, branches tearing at them, until the shooting faded behind. When they finally stopped, Lila was barely conscious, blood soaking her shirt. Let me see. Caleb's hands were steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. The bullet had passed through the muscle of her shoulder, clean but bleeding freely. He tore strips from his shirt, binding the wound tight. The sketches, she mumbled. Still have them. To hell with the sketches. We need to get you help. No, ranch first. Jesse needs warning. They'll hit the others next. She was right. Damn her. Pike would move fast now. Eliminate witnesses before word could spread. Every small ranch in the valley was at risk. They rode through the rest of the night, Lila tied to her saddle, drifting in and out of consciousness. Caleb prayed to a God he'd stopped believing in when Sarah died. Prayed for time, for strength, for the woman he'd come to love to survive. Dawn was breaking as they stumbled into the ranch yard. Jesse ran out, took one look, and started shouting for May, for water, for bandages. "The dam," Caleb told him urgently. "Pike's got a dam in Shadow Wash. Water theft, stolen cattle, the whole thing. Ride to town. Wire the federal marshal." "I'll go," May said, emerging from the house with her medical bag. "Jesse's needed here. You both look half dead, and someone's got to watch for Pike's men." She was right. Caleb could barely stand, exhaustion and fear finally catching up. He carried Lila inside. Later on their bed, when had he started thinking of it as theirs and let May work? "Bullet's out clean," May announced after what felt like hours. "She'll live if fever doesn't set in. You did good with the field dressing." "She saved us," Caleb said numbly. "Took a bullet meant for me, most likely." "Then you best make it count." May fixed him with sharp eyes. "This evidence you gathered, it better be enough to end this. Because Pike won't stop now. It's war, and we all know it." Through the window, dust clouds rose on the horizon. Riders coming. Many riders. "Jesse!" Caleb called, checking his rifle. "Get the long guns. Company's coming." The boy appeared with an armload of weapons, his young face set in determined lines. "We fighting." "We're surviving," Caleb corrected. "May, get to town. Fast. Take Lila's sketches. Wire everyone federal marshals, newspapers, the governor himself. Make noise they can't ignore." "What about Lila?" "I'll protect her." He met the older woman's eyes. "With my life if necessary." May squeezed his shoulder. "Don't let it come to that. Girl's been through enough loss." As May's wagon rattled away, Caleb and Jesse took positions. The dust clouds were closer now, resolving into individual riders. Pike's men, come to finish what they'd started. In the bedroom, Lila stirred, calling his name weakly. Caleb wanted to go to her, hold her, tell her everything would be all right. Instead, he chambered around and waited. The drought had brought them all to this, a battle over water, over survival, over the right to exist on land that demanded everything and promised nothing. But sometimes, Caleb thought as the riders approached, a man had to make a stand. For justice. For love. For the wild beauty who'd shattered his rules and given him a reason to fight again. "Here they come," Jesse whispered. "Then let them come," Caleb replied, sighting down his rifle. "We've got something worth fighting for." The morning sun climbed higher, baking the earth, drawing the last moisture from dying grass. And at the Boone Ranch, two men prepared to hold the line against the drought of human decency that threatened to destroy them all. The storm built on the horizon like God's own fury, a wall of brown and gray that swallowed the sun. But the riders reached the ranch first, 20 men spreading out in a half circle, Ezra Pike at their center like a bloated spider in his web. "Boone," Pike's voice carried across the yard. "You've got something belongs to me. Send out the woman and those papers, and maybe I'll let you live." From behind the overturned water trough, Caleb sighted down his rifle. "Only thing I've got for you is lead, Pike, unless you've come to confess your crimes to the deputy." Pike laughed, an ugly sound. "What deputy, young Reyes, had an unfortunate accident this morning? Horse threw him, hit his head on a rock. Tragic thing." Jesse cursed softly from his position by the well. Caleb felt ice in his veins but kept his voice steady. "Then you've just added murder to your list. Federal marshals will—" "Federal marshals are 5 days away. If that old Biddy Thompson even makes it to town." Pike shifted in his saddle, and Caleb noticed how the men flanked wider, seeking angles.
This is your last chance, the woman for your life. No deal.
Then you'll both burn like your barn.
The first shot shattered the morning stillness. Caleb and Jesse returned fire, picking their targets, making each bullet count. But they were vastly outnumbered, and Pike's men were spreading out, seeking cover, beginning a siege they couldn't hope to win. Then the storm hit. It came like a living thing, a wall of sand and debris that turned noon to twilight in seconds. The wind shrieked, driving dust into eyes, nose, mouth. Visibility dropped to mere feet, gunfire becoming random, dangerous to friend and foe alike.
Inside,
Caleb shouted to Jesse, though the word was nearly lost in the howling wind. They retreated to the house, barricading doors and windows as the storm raged. Through the walls, they could hear Pike's men shouting, trying to reorganize in the chaos. Then, cutting through it all, came the sound of Lila's violin. She stood in the bedroom doorway, shoulder bandaged but steady, playing a fierce melody that somehow carried over the storm's fury. Not the calming rhythm she'd used on the cattle, but something wild and challenging, a song that spoke of retribution coming on the wind.
"What are you doing?"
Caleb had to yell to be heard. "Buying time," she shouted back. "Listen." Through the storm came answering sounds, whistles, shouts, the thunder of many hooves. The small ranchers had come, called by May's warnings or their own conscience, riding through hell itself to make a stand. The battle in the storm was chaos incarnate. Men fought shadows, fired at sounds, stumbled through a world turned brown and violent. Caleb lost track of Jesse, of Lila, could only fight whoever appeared in the swirling dust and trust the others to do the same. He found Pike near the well, the big man's horse down, Pike himself crawling in the dirt seeking shelter. Their eyes met through the storm, and Pike raised his pistol. The shot came from behind Caleb. Pike jerked, clutched his shoulder, his gun spinning away into the wind. Lila materialized from the dust like an avenging angel, her good arm holding Caleb's backup revolver. "That's for Silas Reyes," she said coldly. Pike scrambled backward, but Caleb was on him, wrestling him down despite the older man's size. They rolled in the dust, trading blows, years of soft living against lean muscle and righteous fury. Pike got his hands around Caleb's throat. A rifle butt cracked against Pike's skull. Jesse stood over them, grim satisfaction on his young face. "That's for burning our barn." The storm began to die as suddenly as it had risen, revealing a battlefield. Pike's men were scattered, some down, others surrendering to the coalition of small ranchers who'd answered the call. Tom Henderson was there, and the Paulson boys, and a dozen others who'd suffered under Pike's rule. But the real shock came from the north, a column of riders in blue, marshals' badges glinting through the settling dust. At their head rode James Thornwright himself, the federal prosecutor from Austin. "Got an interesting wire from a Mrs. Thompson," he announced, surveying the scene. "Something about water theft, rustling, and murder. Thought I'd best come see for myself." "How?" Caleb started. "May didn't go to town," Lila said weakly, leaning against the doorframe. "She rode straight for the railroad, flagged down the eastbound express. Thornwright was already coming west for another case." The prosecutor dismounted, studying the sketches May handed him, comparing them to a ledger she'd somehow acquired. "Mr. Pike, you're under arrest. The charges will take some time to enumerate fully, but I believe we'll start with theft of federal water rights."
"You can't prove anything,"
Pike snarled, blood running from his scalp wound. "Actually, we can." Thornwright held up the ledger. "Your bookkeeper, Mr. Graves, was most cooperative when we arrested him in Denver. Seemed to think testifying might save him from the gallows." Pike's face went white. "Hank wouldn't Hank Graves would sell his mother for a reduced sentence, which, incidentally, is approximately what he did." The prosecutor smiled coldly. "Take him away, boys."
as the marshals led Pike and his surviving men away. Thornwright approached Caleb and Lila. "You're the ones who gathered the original evidence." "My wife deserves the credit," Caleb said, arm around Lila's waist. "She risked everything to expose them." "Then the federal government owes you a debt. Mrs. Boone. There's a reward for breaking up this rustling ring should be enough to rebuild your barn and then some." "What about the dam?" Lila asked. "The water will be released immediately. The drought's broken anyway, look west." They turned to see clouds building on the horizon, real rain clouds, heavy with promise. Even as they watched, the first fat drops began to fall, marking the dust like scattered coins. "I need to sit down," Lila said suddenly, swaying. Caleb caught her, lifted her despite her protests, and carried her inside. The house was a wreck, windows broken. Furniture overturned, but it stood. Jesse was already starting cleanup, whistling tunelessly as he worked. "You're going to be all right," Caleb murmured, settling Lila on their bed. "It's over. You're safe now." "We're safe," she corrected, catching his hand. "I told you we'd beat them together." Outside, the rain began in earnest, drumming on the roof, running in streams off the eaves. The other ranchers were organizing work parties to tear down the dam, free the stolen cattle, begin the long work of restoration. "Your violin," Caleb said suddenly. "Where?" "Here." Jesse appeared with the instrument, dusty but intact. "Found it by the well. Looks like it survived better than we did." Lila took it reverently, running her fingers over the scarred wood. "Play something," Caleb said. "Something peaceful, for once." She smiled, tucking the instrument under her chin despite her wounded shoulder. The melody that emerged was sweet and slow, a song of rain after drought, of hope after despair. Jesse joined them, and one by one, the other ranchers gathered on the porch, listening as the music wove through the rainfall. "Never thought I'd see the day," Tom Henderson said quietly. "Pike brought down, water flowing free again. Took all of us." Caleb replied, "Nobody could have done it alone." "That's the truth of it." Henderson looked at Lila with new respect. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I was one of those saying you didn't belong. I was wrong."
We all were,
said another rancher. "But you've proven yourself twice over. You're one of us now." The federal marshals worked through the day, documenting evidence, taking statements. The full scope of Pike's operation was staggering thousands of stolen cattle, corrupted officials across 3 territories, a network of greed that had crushed dozens of honest families. "He'll hang for sure," Thornwright told them that evening. "Graves too, most likely. The rest will get prison time. Your testimony will be crucial. Mrs. Boone." "I'll be there," she promised. As night fell, the rain continued, steady and life-giving. The little sage creek would run full again. The grass would green, the land would heal. In the kitchen, Mae Thompson, who had returned triumphant from her railway adventure, cooked a massive meal for everyone, ordering men about like a general. "You did good, girl," she told Lila quietly. "Took courage to stop running, make a stand. I had something worth standing for." Lila's eyes found Caleb across the room. Someone worth fighting beside. Later, when the others had gone and Jesse was asleep in the bunkhouse, Caleb and Lila sat on the porch, watching the rain. Her shoulder was properly bandaged now, her color better, though she still moved carefully. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild. Barn first, then the rest. Plant a proper garden. Maybe add to the herd. Build the life we should have had from the start." "That sounds perfect." She leaned against him, fitting under his arm like she belonged there. "Caleb, what you said to Thornwright about your wife deserving the credit. You are my wife," he said firmly. "In every way that matters. The rest was just fear-talking, on both sides. No more fear. No more fear. No more rules against music. No more walls between us. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Just us, building something worth having. The violin case sat beside them, water-spotted but whole. Tomorrow, they'd start the long work of recovery. There would be trials, rebuilding, the slow process of healing both land and hearts. But tonight, they had each other, and rain, and the promise of renewal. In the distance, a coyote howled, not lonely this time, but calling to its pack, announcing survival against all odds. Lila smiled at the sound, understanding now what home meant, what belonging felt like. "You know," she said softly, "when I stepped off that train, I never imagined this." "What did you imagine?" "Safety, anonymity, a place to hide until I figured out what came next." She looked up at him, green eyes bright with tears and rain. "I never imagined I'd find love. Never imagined I'd find someone worth fighting the whole world beside." "Life's funny that way," Caleb agreed. "I wanted a plain, quiet woman who wouldn't disturb my orderly existence. Instead, you got a lying, violin-playing, trouble-bringing disaster of a mail-order bride." "Instead," he corrected, tilting her chin up, "I got exactly what I needed. A partner, a fighter, someone whose wild beauty shattered all my rules and tamed my soul." She laughed, the sound mixing with the rain's music. "That sounds like something from one of those dime novels." "Maybe, but it's our story now, and I wouldn't change a word of it." They kissed as the rain washed the world clean. As somewhere in the darkness, Pike's Dam crumbled and water flowed free, as the desert bloomed with promise of life renewed. The storm had passed, both literal and figurative, leaving them standing together on the other side. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in a house scarred by battle but not broken, two souls who'd found each other across miles of deception and pain celebrated the greatest victory of all: the courage to trust, to love, to build something lasting in a hard land that tested everything but rewarded those who endured. The coyote sang again, and this time, Lila sang back not with her violin, but with her heart, a song of gratitude for second chances and the man who'd given her a reason to stop running. And Caleb held her close, marveling at how wrong he'd been to think he wanted peace and quiet. What he'd wanted, what he'd needed. Was this a love wild enough to survive anything? Even the drought of the soul that had nearly destroyed them both. The circuit judge arrived in Red Butte on a Tuesday, his traveling court transforming Murphy's warehouse into a hall of justice. Word had spread across 3 territories the trial of Ezra Pike would be the event of the season, drawing newspapermen from as far as San Francisco and St. Louis. Lila stood before the mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep blue wool that May had helped her make, respectable without being ostentatious. Her shoulders still ached where the bullet had torn through, but she held herself straight. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said from the doorway. "Thornwright has enough evidence without your testimony." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him. "For every family Pike destroyed, for Silas Reyes, for us." She picked up her mother's Bible, the one where they'd hidden the encoded evidence. "Besides, running from hard things is what got me into this mess. Time I faced them head on." The town was packed. Wagons lined every street, horses tied 3 deep at the rails. The small ranchers had come in force, their wives and children scrubbed clean for the occasion. But Pike's supporters were there too, hired guns trying to look like cowboys, sharp-dressed men from Santa Fe whispering in corners. Inside the makeshift courtroom, Prosecutor Thornwright commanded attention, his silver beard and ramrod posture speaking of absolute authority. Across from him, Pike's lawyer, a slick fellow named Beaumont from Denver, shuffled papers with practiced ease. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Porter." The bailiff called. Judge Porter took his seat, studying the packed room over wire spectacles. "This court will have order. Any disturbance will result in immediate removal. Mr. Thornwright, you may begin. The prosecutor's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity. Water theft, cattle rustling, murder, corruption reaching to the highest levels of territorial government. He laid out the charges like a mason building a wall, each crime another stone in Pike's prison. The defense, Beaumont countered smoothly, will show that Mr. Pike is a successful businessman, victim of jealousy and lies spread by competitors and a certain woman of questionable reputation. Lila felt Caleb tense beside her, but she kept her eyes forward. She'd expected this, been warned by Thornwright that Pike's lawyer would attack her character. It was the only defense they had. The first witnesses were the federal marshals who'd arrested Hank Graves. They testified to the ledgers found, the confessions made, the trail of evidence leading back to Pike. Beaumont tried to shake them, but couldn't. These were professional lawmen with nothing to gain from lying. Then came the small ranchers. Tom Henderson told of losing half his herd, of Pike's men driving them off at gunpoint when he protested. The Paulson brothers described their father's death, officially a riding accident, but occurring the day after he'd refused to sell water rights, one by one. They painted a picture of systematic terror. The prosecution calls Mrs. Lila Boone. The walk to the witness chair felt like miles. Lila was aware of every eye upon her, could hear the whispers starting already. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then met Thornwright's encouraging gaze. Mrs. Boone, please tell the court how you came to possess evidence of Mr. Pike's crimes. She spoke clearly, without embellishment. Her work as a telegraph operator, the misdirected message that had started it all, the months of gathering evidence while hiding in plain sight, her flight when Graves discovered her activities. And these documents, Thornwright presented the decoded ledger entries. I encoded them using a cipher based on Visionary's system. Each entry corresponds to a telegraph message I intercepted, showing coordination between Mr. Graves and Mr. Pike in moving stolen cattle. Objection. Beaumont rose. The witness has already admitted to theft of private communications. Overruled. Judge Porter said, the legality of obtaining evidence can be addressed separately. Continue, Mrs. Boone. She walked them through the evidence, translating the coded entries, explaining the patterns. Dates when cattle disappeared matching dates when they appeared at Pike's ranch. Telegraph orders for brand alterations. Payment records to corrupt officials. Your witness, Thornwright said to Beaumont. Pike's lawyer approached like a snake, all false sympathy and sharp fangs. Mrs. Boone, or should I say Miss, your marriage to Mr. Boone was rather sudden, wasn't it? We married the day I arrived in Red Butte. Yes. A mail order arrangement, I understand, though you weren't the woman he actually sent for. I used my cousin's name. I was fleeing for my life. So you admit to deception from the very beginning, Beaumont smiled coldly. Tell me, what other deceptions have you practiced, your supposed telegraph work? Do you have any proof of employment? The Western Union office in Denver was conveniently destroyed in a fire 6 months ago. How fortunate for your story. He paced before the witness chair. Isn't it true you're nothing but a confidence woman, that you invented this tale to trap a lonely rancher into marriage? That's not... That you saw an opportunity to bring down a successful businessman and elevate your own position. Objection, Thornwright called. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'll allow it. Judge Porter said, the witness may answer. Lila lifted her chin. Mr. Pike is many things, but a successful businessman isn't one of them, unless you count theft and murder as business practices. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Beaumont's face darkened. You claim to have noble motives, yet you hid evidence rather than going immediately to the authorities. Why? Because the authorities were corrupted. Pike had... Or because you were waiting for the highest bidder. Tell me, Mrs. Boone, how much did my client's competitors pay you to fabricate this evidence? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Lila felt her temper rising. The wild thing inside her that months of playing respectable hadn't quite tamed. No one paid me anything. I lost everything trying to expose these crimes. My job, my home, nearly my life. Your life seems quite comfortable now. A husband, a ranch. A ranch with a burned barn and bullet holes in the walls. She leaned forward. Mr. Beaumont, I've been shot at, chased across 3 territories, and forced to watch good people suffer because they stood up to your client. If that's your idea of comfort, I'd hate to see hardship. Yet you played violin to calm a stampede, hardly the action of a terrified woman. I did what was necessary to survive, just as I'm doing now by testifying against the man who terrorized this valley. Beaumont tried several more angles, but Lila held firm. When he finally dismissed her, she was shaking but unbroken. Caleb's hand found hers as she returned to her seat, steady and warm. The afternoon brought Prudence Hale to the stand, called as a character witness for Pike. The head of the Ladies' Aid Society sat rigid in her black bombazine, disapproval radiating from every line. Mr. Pike has been a pillar of our community, she declared, a generous contributor to the church, a man of refinement and culture, unlike some who've recently arrived, bringing disorder and scandal. But Thornwright was ready. Mrs. Hale, are you aware that Mr. Pike's contributions to your church came from stolen cattle? That's absurd. Are you aware that the new organ he donated was purchased with money taken from the Henderson family through illegal water manipulation? Prudence's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. That is... Mr. Pike is a gentleman. Is shooting unarmed men the mark of a gentleman? Is burning barns? Is corrupting law enforcement? Objection, Beaumont called, but the damage was done. Prudence left the stand looking shaken, her certainty crumbling. The trial continued for 3 days. Witnesses came and went, evidence mounted, and slowly the web of Pike's empire was laid bare. But the real drama came when Pike himself took the stand. He sat in the witness chair like a toad on a throne, sweating despite the cool morning. Beaumont led him through a carefully rehearsed story, a successful rancher persecuted by jealous neighbors, framed by a mysterious woman with unclear motives. Then Thornwright rose for cross-examination. Mr. Pike, you claim to have acquired your water rights legally. Every bit of it. Have the papers to prove it. These papers, Thornwright produced a stack of documents, signed by Judge Hutchins, who coincidentally received a payment of $500 the day before each signature. Coincidence. And this telegram, he read aloud, package delivered, H agrees to terms. Proceed with acquisition. Sent from your office to Mr. Graves 2 days before the Paulson water rights mysteriously transferred to you. Pike's composure cracked. You can't prove... Actually, I can... Your bookkeeper was quite thorough. Would you like me to read the entry regarding the Paulson accident? That wasn't supposed, I mean. I had nothing to do with... With what, Mr. Pike? The murder you just claimed didn't happen. The courtroom erupted. Judge Porter gavelled for order as Pike realized his mistake. Beaumont objecting frantically, but the truth had slipped out. Order, order. Judge Porter finally restored quiet. Mr. Thornwright, continue. The prosecutor pressed his advantage, unraveling Pike's lies thread by thread. By the time he finished, Pike was gray-faced and stammering, his empire of deception in ruins. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all charges. The foreman announced, water theft, cattle rustling, conspiracy to commit murder, and corruption of public officials. The courtroom exploded again, this time in celebration. Small ranchers embraced, women wept with relief, and somewhere in the back, Jesse Quintero let out a whoop that would have done an Apache proud. Judge Porter gavelled for silence, Ezra Pike, you are sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Sentenced to be carried out within 30 days. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none. As the marshals led Pike away, he turned to stare at Lila with naked hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You haven't heard the last—" Actually, she has. Thornwright stepped between them. "Your remaining men were rounded up this morning. Your accounts are frozen. Your property seized for victim restitution. You're done. Pike, finished." Outside the courthouse, the celebration spilled into the streets. Murphy opened his saloon, drinks on the house for the small ranchers, the Methodist church bells rang, and Mae Thompson organized an impromptu feast in the town square. But Prudence Hale stood apart, her coterie of proper ladies clustered around her like ruffled hens. As Lila passed, the older woman stepped forward. "Mrs. Boone." Lila stopped, Caleb protective at her side. "Mrs. Hale." "I owe you an apology." The words seemed to physically pain Prudence. "I was mistaken in my judgments. You showed courage I didn't expect from someone like you. Someone like me. Someone willing to wear trousers and play violin and disrupt the proper order of things." Prudence's stern face softened slightly. Perhaps the proper order needed disrupting. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Lila nodded graciously, and Prudence swept away, dignity intact if slightly dented. "Will wonders never cease," Mae muttered, appearing at Lila's elbow. Prudence Hale admitting she was wrong. Mark this day in history. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Stories were shared, songs sung, and more than one toast raised to the woman who'd brought down Ezra Pike. But as the sun set, Lila found herself on the edge of the crowd, suddenly overwhelmed. "Too much?" Caleb asked, finding her by the livery stable. "I'm not used to being the hero of the story. Usually I'm the one sneaking out the back door before anyone notices." "Too late for that now. You're stuck being respectable. Worse, you're stuck being respected." She laughed, leaning into his warmth. "What a terrible fate." "Come on." He took her hand. "Let's go home." They rode out as the stars appeared, leaving the celebration behind. The ranch looked different now, scarred but standing, marked by struggle but not defeated. Jesse had already started clearing ground for the new barn, stakes and string marking out a future. "It's really over, isn't it?" Lila asked as they unsaddled the horses. "This part is, there'll be appeals. Probably more trials for the smaller fish. But Pike's done, and the water's flowing free. The rest is just paperwork." They stood together in the doorway, looking out at their land. The creek gurgled full and strong, fed by the released waters from Shadow Wash. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, answered by another. Then another, a whole pack singing to the stars. "You know what this means?" Lila asked. "What?" "I can play my violin in the house now. No more hiding in the barn." Caleb groaned dramatically. "What have I done, peace and quiet? Gone forever." But he was smiling as he said it, and when she retrieved her violin to play a victory song, he pulled her onto his lap instead. Violin and all, the music would wait. Tonight was for other celebrations, quieter but no less joyful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding, healing, learning to live without the constant threat of danger. But tonight, in their small house by the creek, a marshal who'd lost his way and a woman who'd run out of places to run celebrated the greatest victory of all. They'd stood up to power and won. They'd faced down fear and survived. Most importantly, they'd found in each other the courage to stop hiding from life and start living it. The stars wheeled overhead. Indifferent to human struggles, but in the warmth of their kitchen, Caleb and Lila Boone created their own light, a beacon of hope in a hard land that had tested them and found them worthy. The rains had transformed the valley into something from a dream, where dust had ruled for months. Now green grass rippled like an inland sea. The Little Sage Creek ran full and musical, its voice a constant reminder of freedom won. 6 weeks had passed since Pike's trial, and the land was healing itself with the patience of ages. Caleb stood on the frame of the new barn, hammering rafters into place while Jesse worked below, cutting boards with precise strokes. The structure was already twice the size of the old one, built not just with lumber, but with hope for a future that finally seemed possible. "Riders coming," Jesse called, shading his eyes against the morning sun. But these weren't threats anymore. Tom Henderson led a crew of neighbors, wagons loaded with supplies, ready for another day of communal building. It had become tradition each weekend. The valley's ranchers gathered at someone's spread, raising barns, mending fences, digging irrigation channels that would share water fairly among all. "Morning, Caleb," Henderson called. "Brought that hardware you needed, and Mary sent along another one of her apple pies." "Tell her she's spoiling us," Caleb said, climbing down to help unload.
"Tell her yourself. The womenfolk are coming along shortly, planning something for Lila, though they're being mighty secretive about it," as if summoned by her name. Lila emerged from the house, violin in hand. She'd taken to giving lessons to the valley's children, and this morning, young Emma Paulson was due for her weekly session. The sight of his wife in the morning light, healthy and whole, still made Caleb's chest tight with gratitude. "Don't let them work you too hard," she told him, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. "And remember, May's bringing the new doctor by this afternoon. I don't need—"
"That cut on your hand says otherwise. No arguments. Marshall Boone." He watched her walk to the shade of the cottonwood where Emma waited, already positioning her small violin. Soon, the air filled with the careful, sometimes squeaking notes of a simple melody. 3 months ago, such sounds would have driven him to distraction. Now they were the soundtrack of a life rebuilt. The barn rose steadily under many hands. Stories flew with the hammer strokes, jokes about Pike's failed attempts to delay his execution, news from other valleys where corrupt men were being rooted out, inspired by Red Butte's example. The federal prosecutor Thornwright had used their case to launch a territory-wide investigation. The ripples of change spread far beyond their small corner of the world. "Never thought I'd see it," old Samuel Briggs said, taking a water break. "Neighbors working together instead of fighting over scraps. Your wife started something bigger than she knew." "She has a talent for that," Caleb agreed. Around midday, the women arrived in Force May Thompson's wagon leading a parade of buckboards and buggies. They descended on the house with mysterious bundles while shooing the men away from their work. "What are they up to?" Caleb asked May. "Never you mind. Just keep building and stay out of the house for an hour." Her eyes twinkled with mischief. "Trust me, you'll approve." An hour later, Lila emerged looking stunned.
"Caleb, you need to see this."
Inside, the women had transformed their simple home. New curtains graced the windows, nothing fancy, but bright with color. A quilt covered their bed, pieced together from fabric donated by each family. But the real surprise hung on the parlor wall. "It's for your violin," May explained. "Carved it himself. Jesse did. Said it wasn't right. Such a beautiful instrument hiding in a case." The rack was simple but elegant, carved with flowing lines that suggested music itself. Below it, a small shelf held the few pieces of sheet music Lila had managed to acquire. "I don't know what to say," Lila whispered. "Say you'll play for us," Prudence Hale suggested from the doorway. The woman had become, if not warm, at least cordial since the trial. "The children have been telling us about your lessons. I'd like to hear for myself." Lila took down the violin, still bearing its battle scars, but sweet-voiced as ever. She played a frontier ballad, one that spoke of hard times and hope, of love found in unlikely places. The women listened with tears and smiles, and when she finished, the applause was genuine. "Now then," May said briskly, "there's food to be served and men to feed. Lila,
You rest that shoulder. Dr. Morrison wants to examine you when he arrives.
The afternoon brought Dr. Morrison, young and earnest from Philadelphia, drawn west by the promise of adventure and the need for medical care in the territories. He pronounced Lila's shoulder healing well, though he scolded her for lifting anything heavier than her violin.
And there's something else, he said, packing his bag.
Mrs. Thompson asked me to examine you for other possibilities. Given your symptoms, the fatigue, the morning queasiness you mentioned.
Lila's eyes widened. You don't mean...
I'd say you're about 2 months along. Congratulations, Mrs. Boone. Caleb, just entering to have his hand examined, stopped dead in the doorway. 2 months, Lila.
She nodded, tears starting. I suspected, but with everything happening, I wasn't sure.
He crossed the room in 2 strides, lifting her carefully, spinning her once before remembering the doctor's presence and setting her down. A baby. We're having a baby. Appears so. Dr. Morrison said dryly. I'll leave you to the celebration. Mrs. Boone, I'll check on you monthly. Take care of yourself and no more gunfights. Please. After he left, they sat together on the porch, watching the barn raising continue, processing this new miracle. The valley spread before them, green and thriving. Water glinting in irrigation channels that connected all the ranches like veins of life.
Are you happy?
Lila asked softly. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Though I have to say, your timing remains interesting. Couldn't have waited until after the gunfights and trials.
Where would be the fun in that?
She leaned against him, sighing contentedly.
Besides, this little one is already a fighter. Must take after both parents.
Jessie appeared around the corner, grinning broadly. Mrs. Thompson told me the news. Congratulations. Does this mean I get to teach someone else to rope cattle? In about 16 years, Caleb said. Don't rush things. The young man had grown in these past months, shoulders broadening, confidence building. He'd been offered work at several larger ranches, but chose to stay. As he'd told Caleb, this is home. You don't abandon home. As sunset approached, the barn stood complete fresh lumber golden in the slanted light. The workers gathered for the traditional blessing. Pastor Williams from town offering prayers for the structure and the family it would serve. Lord, he intoned, bless this barn raised by community hands. May it shelter the fruits of honest labor. May its doors never close to those in need. And may it stand as testament to what people can accomplish together. Amen, the gathering chorused. Then came the feast tables groaning under the weight of shared plenty. Each family had brought their best, creating a spread that would have graced any city hotel. But this was better than fancy dining. Caleb thought, this was community, forged in hardship and strengthened by victory. As darkness fell, lanterns appeared, and someone brought out a fiddle. Dancing began nothing formal, just neighbors celebrating life. Caleb led Lila through a careful waltz, mindful of her shoulder and their precious new secret. Remember our wedding day? She asked. You told me there were rules. No music, no disruptions. I was a fool.
You were scared. So was I. She smiled up at him. Look at us now, dancing at our own barn raising, surrounded by friends, with a baby on the way. If someone had told me that day at the station, you'd have run for the next train.
No. Her green eyes were serious.
I'd have thought it was too good to be true. That happiness like this wasn't meant for people like me.
People like us, he corrected. We're both done running from happiness. Lila Boone. The party continued late, but eventually families began drifting home. May was among the last to leave, pressing a packet into Lila's hands.
Raspberry leaf tea,
she said quietly. For the pregnancy. My mother swore by it, and I've birthed 4 healthy babies. Come see me tomorrow, and we'll talk about what to expect. After everyone had gone, Caleb and Lila stood before their new barn, solid and sturdy. It represented everything they'd fought for the right to build, to grow, to live without fear. "Play something," Caleb said suddenly. "A song for our new beginning." Lila retrieved her violin from the house, returning to stand in the barnyard. The moon had risen, full and silver, turning the world into a landscape of light and shadow. She raised the bow and began to play not a sad song or a fighting song, but something new, a melody that spoke of seeds planted and growing, of water flowing free, of love that had survived drought and storm to bloom in unlikely soil. The coyotes joined in, their wild harmony twining with her civilized melody, until the two became one, the song of the frontier itself, where wilderness and civilization met and created something entirely new. When the last note faded, they stood together in the moonlight, hands linked over the promise of new life growing between them. "You know," Lila said thoughtfully, "I never did tell you my real name." Caleb blinked. "What?" "O'Rourke was my cousin's name. Remember, I've been meaning to tell you, but somehow it never seemed important anymore." She turned to face him fully. "It's Fitzgerald. Lila Margaret Fitzgerald. Though I suppose it doesn't matter now I'm Lila Boone. And that's all I ever want to be." He laughed, pulling her close. "Any other secrets I should know about?" "Oh, hundreds, probably. But we have time now. All the time in the world to learn each other's stories." "I like the sound of that." They walked to the house hand in hand, pausing at the door to look back once more. Their land stretched out before them, scarred but healing, tested but proven. In the new barn, horses nickered softly. From the creek came the sound of flowing water, constant as a heartbeat. And somewhere in the vast western night, a train whistle echoed across the desert, carrying other souls toward their own destinies. "No regrets?" Caleb asked. "Not one," Lila answered. "I came here looking to hide. Instead, I found the courage to stand and fight. I found home. I found you." "And I found you," he echoed, "my wild beauty who shattered all my rules." "And tamed your soul?" "No," he smiled, touching her face gently. "Not tamed, set free. There's a difference." They went inside, closing the door on the night. In the parlor, Lila's violin rested in its new place of honor, ready for tomorrow's music. On the kitchen table lay plans for expansion, more irrigation channels, a larger garden, perhaps even a school for the valley's children. The future spread before them like an unwritten song, full of possibility. Outside, the land lay quiet under stars, at peace after its long struggle. The water flowed, the grass grew, and life continued its ancient rhythms. And in a small ranch house in Red Butte Valley, two souls who had found each other across miles of deception and pain looked forward to a tomorrow they would build together. The drought had broken in more ways than one. Where once there had been only survival, now there was hope. Where once there had been isolation, now there was community. And where once two damaged hearts had tried to protect themselves behind walls of fear, now there was love wild and free as the coyote's song, deep and constant as the flowing stream, strong enough to weather any storm the frontier might bring. Their story would be told in years to come, how a mail-order bride who wasn't what she seemed had brought down an empire of corruption, how a bitter widower had learned to love again, how a community had come together to fight for justice. But for now, it was enough to be home, to be together, to be building a life worth living in a land that demanded everything but gave back in equal measure to those brave enough to stand their ground. The candles burned low as they prepared for bed. Another day ending, another beginning tomorrow, and in the gentle darkness of their room, as Caleb held his wife and their unborn child close, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the wild beauty who had shattered his rules, for the violin that had sung them through danger, for the courage to fight and the wisdom to know when the fighting was done. Morning would come with its chores and challenges, but tonight was for peace, for promises kept, for the quiet joy of love that had found its way home at last. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of the Old West. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts about this journey together. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners who love tales of courage, romance, and adventure from America's frontier days. Until next time, happy trails.